Why is the United Church of Canada dying out? Why is it going extinct? That's our story for today. And again, I think it's quite a good news story. There was a great headline in the Calgary Herald on June 7, because on June 10, the United Church of Canada turned 100 years old. And the Calgary Herald headline says, "What's next?" And the answer to that is probably nothing. As the Herald reported, quote, "Statistically, the UCC closes a church a week, and some predict it may be extinct within 15 years. The membership of the denomination is half of what it was in the 1960s, approximately 1.2 million people. And a fraction of those, by the way, based on other surveys, actually attend services. Because why would you get up early for church on Sunday morning when all you're actually going to get is a sort of toned down version of what you'd get at any sort of pride event across the country, but with less booze? Many of the people, again, who claim membership in the United Church claim membership because they want to associate with a church, but a church that isn't really a church and doesn't associate with any of the fundamental teachings of Christianity. And a quick survey of realtor listings reveals many old United Church buildings up for sale. These are beautiful buildings. Real Christians should buy them and actually start using them for real worship. In Ontario, it's just kind of sad whenever I see it, but I see it all the time driving around for presentations. A lot of these old churches have been turned into trendy houses. People buy them and retrofit them as houses and put a loft in them. And that's because the churches can't use them anymore because their membership is either left or their membership is frankly dying out. So a little bit of background on the UCC. It was created in 1925 when several Methodist, Congregational, and Presbyterian churches all amalgamated to create a new national Canadian denomination. And as the Herald pointed out, it swiftly became a church that people claimed as their own, whether they attended Sunday services or not. That's even worse now. So it was the church a community would turn to for rituals when they no longer bothered to attend anywhere else: funerals, weddings, baptisms. And the UCC, in other words, was sort of a utilitarian religious establishment for people who weren't religious, but still wanted to get their kids baptized, wanted to get married in a church. Again, the UCC, because it's sort of a heritage denomination, owns a lot of beautiful buildings. And so if you wanted to get nice wedding photos at a church and you wanted Pastor Francis to marry you, this is the church that you were going to go to. But the UCC has also served another national function, because it baptized and indeed helped to midwife the sexual revolution in Canada. The United Church of Canada has been actually one of the most destructive forces in our national history because it contributed vigorously to the breakdown of Canadian culture and the destruction of our heritage, but it did so while kind of being Christians in drag. They cosplayed as Christians. They had some of the trappings of Christianity, although even that is largely gone, while pushing for some fundamentally anti-Christian and insidious agendas. Even in my community in rural Ontario, it's very easy to identify a United Church building because they're festooned with so many LGBT flags that they kind of look like, a present at gay Christmas or something like that. And so the garish secular symbolism of cultural collapse is what you see whenever you encounter a United Church, especially during June. Decades ago, ironically, the United Church earned itself the nickname the NDP at prayer because it was defined by its social activism, not by its Christian orthodoxy. And it actually explicitly rejects Christian orthodoxy on almost every major social issue. There's one example I come back to a lot because the defining kickoff moment, historical moment of the abortion rights movement in Canada is the 1970 abortion caravan, which left from the Vancouver Art Gallery in 1970, traveled all the way across the country. They arrived in Ottawa on Mother's Day. They dumped a black coffin on Pierre Trudeau's front yard at 24 Sussex, and they chained themselves to the railings in Parliament, shutting down the House of Commons for the first and thus far only time in Parliament's history. And they drove across the country in vehicles with slogans such as "Smash Capitalism" and "Abortion is our right." They characterized themselves as furious women who were demanding abortion, free abortion on demand without apology. And they did these sort of gruesome back alley abortion guerrilla theater plays in the cities where they stopped, and they gave presentations. And they were assisted all across the country by the United Church of Canada, which even provided them hosting at several of the cities that they came to. So again, the sort of sacred cow of the Canadian abortion rights movement. There's been an entire book called The Abortion Caravan written on this event, was assisted by the United Church of Canada, was sort of bloodily baptized by the United Church of Canada. By the 1980s, the UCC explicitly supported the decriminalization of abortion, essentially de facto signing the death warrants of the more than 4 million unborn children who would be killed in Canada since 1969. And as the sexual revolution evolved, the UCC evolved along with it. I'll give you one example. The gender, sexuality, and orientation section of their website currently states this, quote, "We affirm that gender and sexuality are gifts of God and welcome people of all sexual orientations and gender identities." And then they take explicit aim at churches who still cling to biblical truth on matters of gender and sexuality. Here's what they write on their website. "Even as we seek to eliminate sexism, misogyny, homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, we know that we too are guilty of these forms of oppression. We acknowledge the roles that Christianity and religion in general play in such oppression. We hear the call to action to end all forms of discrimination. We acknowledge that the work of justice is not just about how we treat people who enter the four walls of our church, which isn't many, but what matters is how we treat people in the world. We are committed to journeying to where all people live in justice and peace together." So this struggle session is really not about the UCC. It's meant to indict all Christian churches who still hold to fundamental Christian beliefs. They're sending a message. You don't need to be Christian like that. You can be Christian like this, which is to say, not Christian at all. But they've fundamentally served as these sort of spiritual queaslings that allow the progressive government to say, we're not actually anti-Christian. We're anti-bigoted and hateful Christians. What we need is for Christians to be like these Christians, the United Church of Canada, the Anglican Church in Canada, these mainline denominations that are pretty much entirely collapsing and going extinct, and Michael Corn can turn the lights off when the last one closes its doors. And indeed, the UCC boasts about LGBT pastors who serve their shrinking flocks. So the minister of the Calvary Pastoral Charge in Kingston, Ontario, identifies as transgender, and famously in 2018, the denomination decided against, you could not make this up, defrocking an atheist pastor, Greta Vosper, who doesn't believe in God or in the Bible. Now, to be fair, Vosper could be forgiven for looking at the UCC and concluding this was the perfect place for her to serve, because she represents the activism and the cultural influence of the UCC far better than any sort of lingering pretense of Christianity. Greta Vosper, at least, is honest about what she stands for, and I think she is quite a good representative of the United Church of Canada. So I wasn't too upset when I covered that case back in 2018, because I think that when people look at the UCC, they should look at Greta Vosper, a female pro-LGBT atheist pastor who doesn't believe in the Bible. That she is a really good microcosm of what the UCC has become. So as the United Church closes out a century on the slow but steady path to extinction, I think its collective suicide is probably best symbolized by one of their last remaining functions. As I mentioned earlier, they're a useful ecclesiastical idiot used by the mainstream press to demonize Canadian Christians who still hold to Christianity's teachings on sex, sexuality, and the killing of children in the womb. The UCC's compassion does not extend to children who are growing beneath their mother's heart. They support Canada's abortion regime, and so the UCC's version of compassion would allow a doctor to decapitate, dismember, and disembowel a baby just before birth. That is what they stand for. And no number of LGBT scarves and clerical garments can cover up the bloodstains of the ideology that they have baptized and informed several generations of their fading flock can be consistent with the teachings of Christianity. When the press covers the opposition of a church community to the LGBT ideology, they almost always get a quote from a usually female UCC clergy person to emphasize that the real Christians are on the side of the sexual revolution. We've seen this all the time. You'll see a church attract controversy because, breaking news, Christian church still holds to what Christian churches held to for 2,000 years, but the CBC doesn't want to look overtly bigoted. So what they'll do is they'll go down to, the lesbian clergy person at the pride flag festoon church down the street and say, what do you think about the bigots down the road? And they'll say the true spirit of Christianity is transgender blessings and pride celebrations. And the CBC quotes them and thus distinguishes real Christianity from fake Christianity, which of course is gaslighting, and the reverse of that is always true. But the good news is the United Church will likely not survive to celebrate its 150th anniversary. And if we're given life, likely all of us will live to see the death of the United Church. They can take comfort in the fact that they served the sexual revolution well, then their usefulness is at an end. Meanwhile, in more good news, a 2017 study by a professor from Wilfrid Laurier University revealed that the only Canadian churches that are still growing are those that reject everything that UCC stands for. That only churches that still hold to conservative theology are actually growing in Canada in the 2000s. And again, that makes sense, because in a culture where Christianity is demonized very often by the fake Christians at the United Church of Canada, you want a theology that you can hang on to both hands. And if you're going to get up early on Sunday morning to go to church, you actually want to hear the truth, not just a less cool, very aging version of what the sexual revolution was teaching decades ago. Thank you so much for joining the Bridgehead this week. We hope you found it helpful, as always. If you enjoyed it, please do like the video, share it around, subscribe, tell your friends to subscribe, leave a comment. You can heckle or harass me in the comments. And if you have some ideas of subjects you really think that we should be covering, you can drop those too. Otherwise, you can find us wherever you get your podcast content. Thanks so much for listening.